Welcome back, all. We are back for another episode of Booked and Busy.
Mm-hmm.
We are so happy to be back. Thank you so much for all the love on the first episode. It was super fun. Sorry it took so long, but
I know we're here though.
we're here. It's been a month about
It's been a month.
since we
Yeah,
last
it's been when did we record the last one? A month, right? Longer?
time blends together. I don't
I
really
don't
know.
know. We did warn you guys that this was not going to be like a consistent thing. It's kind of when we can, and so we're here. But we're talking about our favorite book ever today, which we're excited about
We
because
are.
this has been a long time coming, something we've been anticipating, and it's here.
It's here. Should we jump right into it?
We should jump right into it.
Okay, let's do it. So, we are starting with the one and only Shantaram by Gregory David Roberts, aka Masterpiece. I
Hmm.
think brought both of us out of like our reading drought that we were in
Hmm.
for years.
Hmm.
Val, how did you discover this book? Because you recommended this to me. So that's how I discovered it. How did you discover it?
Honestly, like it's one of the processes that you and I do so where I just go to the bookstore and like get the cart, throw a bunch of books in there, sit down, have a little beverageino,
Mhm.
read and see if like something kind of, stands out to me. And this was one of those books. Yeah. And so I picked this book up and then I read the first page, which should we just read what that first? Oh, we posted on our Instagram.
Yeah, go check our Instagram
Yeah.
because it's gonna take it's a long one, but the first
Yeah.
page.
The first page, like, holy fucking shit. That's all I'll say. And I was very captivated and intrigued by what the book was about. And I read this book back in like 2017, 2018. So it's been a little bit for me.
Yep, yep. And then yeah, you told me about it. You were like, you have to read this book, and I did, and it was amazing. Should we
Hmm.
give everyone a little synopsis?
So basically, it kind of chronicles around the main character, Lynn. Oh, by the way, this is considered like a semi autobiography based on Gregory David Roberts' life.
Yep.
Obviously, some of the elements, storyline has been embellished for the sake of it being a novel.
Mhm.
Um, but basically, it's about his life story. He's originally from Australia. He was in prison. He escaped that prison. He fled to Bombay. And it's basically just about him settling in India, the people that he's met, his story of redemption, love, loss. It's kind of just a very generalized synopsis, but it's beautiful.
It is. Yeah, he definitely the whole book is essentially his redemption arc in a way,
Hmm.
and how he starts at this very low place. He's an escaped convict. So he escapes the prison in Australia. He like literally goes over the wall and
Hmm.
escapes with another inmate and flees. Somehow makes it to Bombay, and yeah, he becomes a doctor there. He works in the slums. He eventually meets all these people that lead him to working for the Bombay Mafia.
Hmm.
He meets his love interest, beautiful Carla. We will do our character overview next. But yeah, he eventually begins working for the Bombay Mafia, and he sells what, fake passports. Again, we did not reread this book before starting this pod. Sorry, everyone, but
Hmm.
so not everything. Can't remember everything, and we're not going to be going over every single thing that happened, but yes, he ends up working for the Bombay Mafia, and
Hmm.
it's just the most amazing beautiful story ever. And his words, like how he writes
Mm.
about everything, and his just self-awareness and his self-reflection, it's just amazing. So
Well, that's why I think the book is even that much more impactful because, yes, the storyline in itself is so interesting, right? Him fleeing prison, settling into a whole new country, meeting different people, but I think it's also the symbolism in his writing. Like it's so philosophical and reflective and thoughtful, and it's basically just like a monologue of all of his thoughts. Like this is basically just his diary or his journal
Yes.
reflecting on everything that brought him from, you know, fleeing the prison to where he is now. But then it's also interesting the life that he left behind in Australia, because he had a family, he
Yep.
had a daughter, you know, he had a heroin addiction. So there's just like so many elements of this story, but I think like what really is the best is the writing and the prose.
Ugh,
Like we'll get to that because we have some examples to back that shit up.
100%. So, yeah, as we mentioned, main character is Gregory David Roberts. However, in this book, he is known as Lynn, aka Lynn Baba, aka
AKA Shantaram.
we are going to really try to keep our emotions in check.
Yeah,
And, you know, if we can't, sorry, not sorry, because you will not understand
no.
until you read the book. So,
Mhm,
main character, Lynn. So, again, protagonist, main guy.
mhm,
Then we have, who should we mention next? I'm looking at notes also. We have Carla.
mhm,
Beautiful Carla. His love, his soulmate, but she's got some secrets. You know,
mhm.
she's been through a lot of shit herself. She has a very traumatizing past, kind of similar to Lynn, and they're both kind of escaping their pasts and themselves, and it leads them both to Bombay, India, on a street. And she how does she first, I think she like saves him from getting hit by
Yeah,
something.
from a hit by a car. Yeah.
Yes, so Carla is the love interest. And if you ever just want to be so depressed to the point where you can't breathe, just read his descriptions about Carla, which again
Oh,
we'll get into. The way he talks about this woman, it is it's unbelievable. It's
no,
unlike
it's
anything
crazy.
I've ever read in my life. Like truly. Just amazing.
Okay.
So this
Woo.
this is how Lynn first describes Carl. This is page 22 into 23. Basically, he almost stepped in front of the bus. He like just landed in Bombay. Things are crazy. Almost steps in front of the bus. She grabs him and saves him. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. She was slender with black shoulder length hair and pale skin. Although she wasn't tall, her square shoulders and straight backed posture, with both feet planted firmly apart, gave her a quietly determined physical presence. I won't know what she was wearing, blah, 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 blah. The clue to everything a man should love and fear in her was there, right from the start, in the ironic smile that primed and swelled the archery of her full lips. First of all, what? There was pride in that smile and confidence in the set of her fine nose. Without understanding why, I knew beyond question that a lot of people would mistake her pride for arrogance and confuse her confidence with impassivity. I didn't make that mistake. My eyes were lost, swimming, floating free in the shimmering lagoon of her steady, even stare. Her eyes were large and
Oh.
spectacularly green. It was the green that trees are in vivid dreams. It was the green that the sea would be if the sea were perfect.
Like I'm drip sweating. I'm
No,
fucking
like
sweating. Okay.
I'm shaking.
Ugh.
Who who says that? Like if
Listen,
you were
all I know from now on, if you're gonna compliment me on like my eyes,
right.
hair color, something, you better connect it to some form of like nature,
No, you
something
better say
beautiful.
your brown eyes are like the most perfect wood on a summer day with the whatever. Like I don't know. Just say something like it because
Yeah,
so that's kind of like that's just how he sees her within the first 1 second of meeting.
I know.
So you can just only imagine how they are for the rest of the book. And it's essentially just him describing her in the most beautiful, unbelievable ways. And again, if I could read them all, I would, but I truly need everyone
Hmm.
to read it for themselves because holy fucking shit, is he just such an amazing writer when it comes to her, especially. Like, oh my God.
And I think that is there's a quote in the book which I will read about just being kind of in the right place, right time, and then like planting yourself in that moment. And the quote is, there's a kind of luck that's not much more than being in the right place at the right time, a kind of inspiration that's not much more than doing the right thing in the right way. And both only really happen to you when you empty your heart of ambition, purpose, and plan, and when you give yourself completely to the golden fate filled moment. Bye.
Like,
Like, who, how does he think of this? Like, I
again,
just
like
don't understand.
that moment for him was fate. Like, she was his fated reason to end up
100%.
on that street in Bombay at that moment. And that, again, is a theme that carries throughout the book. So that's her. And then we have,
Well, to jump into that, I think it's one thing to feel those emotions to somebody, but to be able to put those into words to articulate it is something completely different.
yes.
And how he describes her from the moment he sees her, like his description of what she looks like, how she carries herself. And something about Carla that I really loved and like resonated with me is, even though she did come from a very like complex, complicated past and she does harbor a lot of secrets, she is so witty, sarcastic, and she carries herself with, I don't want to say it's arrogance, but I think she knows, even though there is like kind of maybe a baseline of self-loathing there too,
Hmm.
she does carry herself in such a way that makes her so self-assured in like what she brings to the table.
Hmm.
And I just freaking love Carla.
Yeah.
She's forever one of my favorite like female characters in any book that I've read.
Yeah. No, she's amazing. And again, I think she acts that way. It's all a defense mechanism. It's
Mhm.
all to keep people at bay,
Mhm.
people at a certain distance, and to never get fully deep into Carla, which she succeeds at until Lynn comes along.
I know. And even Lynn too, because we didn't kind of really touch on this with him, but he's also such a mystery
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that he has so many conflicting character traits where
Mm-hmm.
he's like a man of violence, but he's also an empathetic person. And, you know, he's very loyal to his friends.
Yep.
He has like an appreciation for philosophy. But I think like he struggles a lot with the complexities of some of his life decisions,
Yeah.
which we'll obviously talk about. But he's also such an interesting and deep character as well.
And that's why they connect so well, because they both are able, even though it's hard for them to get deep with other people, when they do,
Hmm.
and when they do with each other, it's just like they just flow with one another so fucking well. And
I know.
oh, they're amazing. So, okay, next character is going to be Kotterbai, aka Abdel Kader Khan. And he is essentially, again, he's another very complex character. And he
Hmm.
is essentially the mafia don of Bombay. He owns the slums where Lynn is living currently. He
Hmm.
owns a lot of other areas of Bombay. He's basically the head of the mafia that Lynn eventually works for.
Hmm.
And he also becomes a father figure to Lynn. He becomes a father figure, he becomes a teacher, he becomes a friend. That relationship, obviously, other than Carla, is, I think, the most important relationship he has
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
books. Again, just because of how complex it is and how deep it gets. And they have so many deep philosophical, universe, religious conversations that
Hmm.
just really make you take a step back
Hmm.
and look at life and what life is and the choices that you make and all of that. So he's super important. And again, just such a complex person. And
But
okay,
I also think these characters, I'd say more so Carla, Lynn, Catterby, maybe Abdullah, but maybe not so much so. But I think that they grapple between like what is good and what is evil because there's so
Mhm.
many good things about these characters, but they're also a part of so many objectively bad things as
Right,
well. So like where does that put them on the spectrum, you know?
right, right. Next main character I would say would be Prabhu.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about Prabhu, go.
Sophia's clearly too distraught to be able to give a description about Prabhu. Okay, so his real name is Prabhakar, otherwise known as Prabhu. So he is one of Lynn's best friends. He meets Lynn, or Lynn meets him rather, when Lynn first touches down in Mumbai. Prabhu is kind of this tour guide that uses that as a way to kind of make a living for himself. So he really tries to encourage Lynn to take him up on his offer of having him explore, you know, the city of Bombay and whatnot. So they become super close, and Prabhu is this just such a genuine character, like so kind hearted.
Mhm.
He's humorous, he's selfless, he's cheerful, and he really kind of just like brings Lynn into his life in India and like his family, his village. And that's so Prabhu's family in a village in Sundar, I believe is the name. That's where Lynn gets the name Shantaram is through Prabhu's family. So it's also something really, really important that connects throughout the novel too.
Yep. Yep. He's just, and he's such a juxtaposition to Lynn because Prabhu just lives life. He's just so happy and carefree, and he's just such a good, a truly good person. And again,
Yeah.
as we kind of touched on, Lynn throughout the book is just constantly battling whether he is good or evil. And he just has this symbol of just goodness at his
Mm-hmm.
side at all
Mm-hmm.
times. And it's just, I loved Prabhu's scenes. We're not
It's
gonna,
great.
we're not,
We're not going to get emotional yet.
no, we're not. And then I guess other main super important character would be Abdullah.
And Didier.
Do you think he's just as important to mention?
Yes,
Okay.
because I think he well, we'll kind of just jump into Didier quick, but I think he introduces Lynn to a lot of people because he's a local at Leopold's, which is basically this bar kind of in where would you say it is, like in terms of the city? Because it's not quite in the slums, but it's also not
Yeah.
quite
I
deep
would
into the
say it's
city.
kind of right when you're crossing over. It's kind of the in between. I would say like a town square area. Picture a town square, it's in there. And this is the
Hmm.
bar where everyone goes. Lynn meets Didier there. He's always there. He has meetings with Catterby there. Like a lot of the focal point of the story is at Leopold's because it's just
Hmm.
the center hub where everyone meets and gathers and schemes and all that. So yeah,
Hmm.
he met Didier there.
Hmm.
And
And Didier also, because he's a French guy, he has like such a different, I think he adds such a different kind of piece to their group
mhm,
because he has such a different background.
right.
But I think Didier is so hilarious and he kind of like, I don't know, goes to the beat of his own drum. And I love that about him
Yep.
too.
Yep. And all these people have also been in Bombay for so long, especially
Hmm.
because Lynn is coming in. You know, he's an Australian. He's an outsider. So
Right.
I think it helps him meeting people like Didier and, other side characters like Johnny Cigar and
Hmm.
Lisa, who really aren't necessarily from Bombay, but they've all made Bombay their home.
Hmm.
It kind of just shows Lynn, like, okay, this can happen for me too.
Right.
So, and then, okay, back to Abdullah.
My pride and joy. My pride and joy. Oh my God.
Is so Abdullah is Cotterby's like right hand man. So he
Hmm.
works with Cotterby and eventually he meets Lynn and they become obviously aside from Prabhu, I would say Abdullah is Lynn's closest friend, becomes
Right.
Lynn's closest friend.
Hmm.
It takes a little bit because again, I think Lynn he doesn't really know who to trust from the beginning,
Hmm.
but it blossoms into such a beautiful friendship and he's such a beautiful person and oh
He's great. And I love that he has such an edge to him too, where
Yep.
I think he's more where Lynn kind of wears his emotions on his sleeve in a way. I think Abdullah is a lot more like reserved into himself,
Right.
but that doesn't mean he doesn't have some of those same qualities either. So
Right.
I love their friendship. I love how they got so close. I love how they consider each other brothers.
Yep.
Oh, I love Abdullah. He's such like a central character
Yeah.
to this book.
Oh, it's just all so good. And there are definitely side characters too, which we aren't going to go
Yeah.
too deep into because this will literally be a 4 hour long pod. But every character that is brought up plays some sort of important role in Lynn's life and in his journey. And again, we're gonna try not to spoil too much because we do encourage everyone to read this book if they haven't already. So, but yeah, there's other side characters, but the ones we mentioned, I would say so far, at least in
Mhm.
this book, I would say are the most important. And I think some of the side characters come into play in the next book, which is Mountain Shadow,
Yeah.
which we'll do next.
And I think really all that you need to know about like the secondary characters is that it either falls into people with like the slums, people with the mafia, or or like Carla's friends. Like Lisa is one
Right.
of
Or people at like or Didier's friends, his group,
right.
which is the Johnny Cigars of it all and the Vikrams and
Hmm.
those
Should
people.
we touch on Madame Zhao's brothel?
So we'll address one more character, and that would be Madame Zhao.
Hmm.
Madame Zhao runs like what the biggest brothel
Hmm.
known, at least in the city. So she's
Hmm.
very rich, very powerful, very see you next Tuesday.
She's a bitch, if I'm speaking pretty candidly. She has a lot of ulterior motives, just not a good person,
Yep.
obviously. And so she orders Lynn to go to prison. And then
Right.
Madame Zhao is the one that tortures and kills Carla's best friend, which is why Carla has such an interesting relationship with Madame Zhao, where like she's not that tough bitch that we typically see her as. Like
Right.
she's much more
She
passive and like
Yeah, because those are scenes where she almost comes across as a little weak and scared
exactly,
every time.
exactly. Other secondary characters can kind of be connected to Madame Zhao in a way. But other than that, like Soph said, every secondary character plays a huge role in the book to some degree, which
Yep.
I think is also really cool because I don't think that's done a lot in books really, where characters are mentioned and but they don't play like a crucial role in like the development of the story.
The only
So
other series that I have encountered that would be like Sarah J. Maas's Roar. I'm
totally.
not even going to start there because
Not even going to start there.
we're not. But yeah, so I loved how ultimately everyone is part of his story. Everyone is important in one way or another, and it shapes the end of this book and the end of the next book, which again, we are going to cover Mountain Shadow next episode, which is the
Hmm.
sequel and last book of the duology. But all right, should we jump right into kind of like main themes of the book, main like scenes we want to go over?
Totally.
Okay, so I would say main themes of this book that again just resonated with us so much, and I don't think you guys will truly understand until we start reading some quotes, but I would say regret is a big main theme. Lynn comes from a troubled past. He was a heroin addict. He has a lot of regrets about the choices he made, abandoning his family, all that stuff. So he's coming into India a pretty broken person, full of just like, am I
Hmm.
a good person? I don't really know where to go from here. He's also on the run, so he cannot risk getting caught or he's pretty much screwed. There's regret. Also, main theme love.
Hmm.
Love. And not even just love, romantic love. It's the love he has with Prabhu. It's the love he has for Kadarbai. It's the love he has for Abdullah and all these other secondary characters. And one of my favorite quotes is, and yes, I'm going to read it. One of the reasons we crave love and seek it so desperately is that love is the only cure for loneliness and shame and sorrow. But
Hmm.
some feelings sink so deep into the heart that only loneliness can help you find them again. Some truths about yourself are so painful that only shame can help you live with them. And some things are just so sad that only your soul can do the crying for you. Can we just take a second and just like, what the fuck? Who?
No, like,
That's just one quote, guys. That's one quote. That's one quote. There's
no,
thousands of other like that. And it's just so true. Like, it, it I don't know. I just have no words. He's essentially saying that we seek love so desperately because we think it's the only thing that can cure depression, loneliness, whatever it
mhm,
is. And in actuality, that is not the case at all times. You can have so much love, you can have an abundance of love around you, and some things are just so painful, it doesn't fix it. And the only way to fix it is, well, one, to love yourself, and two, just to really sit with the things that you have done and your flaws and to reflect. I would say that's another big theme of this book is reflection. And because
mhm.
Lynn is constantly reflecting on his past and what he could have done differently and what he it's just oh
I know. And I think that actually is a good segue into exploring like good versus evil, but also all of the moral ambiguity throughout the book. Because when you can recognize like those things that may not sit super well with you or you may not super proud of, how much do you feel like that plays a part in your own identity?
mhm,
So I think that's a huge theme throughout this whole book where, you know, a lot of like ethical boundaries are kind of often blurred from decisions that are made by certain characters. I'd say specifically the protagonist Lynn. And I think it just kind of poses the question like, can you do wrong things for the right reasons? And I
right,
think that in one of the discussions that Catterby and Lynn have, they talk about, well, maybe you can do those things if you're able to first acknowledge that they're not necessarily the right things to do, but are sometimes necessary to do.
right.
So that's also why I think this book is incredible in terms of just the philosophical and psychological like underpinnings and exploration, which
Mhm.
I love. And we're going to have a lot of quotes to highlight and showcase that, which I'm excited about.
Yeah. No, good and evil is definitely the main thing, and he has so many. So each of his like meetups with Cotterby are literally just talks of the most intense, deep, universal questions that you could ever imagine. One of the first things that they ever talk about is if whether or not Lynn believes in God. And
Hmm.
Cotterby essentially asks him, "Do you believe in God?" Lynn says, "Nope, I don't." And Cotterby's response, correct me if I'm wrong, it's pretty much, well, the thought of God and God being real is impossible, but that only makes it more likely that he exists.
So going off of that point, Soph, because that's a conversation that Lynn and Catterby had, which I think it was about like the ultimate complexity.
Yes, I have that
Um,
too.
and a quote about that is, let's find it. So it's moving towards some kind of ultimate complexity. Everything in the universe is moving towards it. And that final complexity, that thing that we're all moving to, is what I choose to call God. And if you don't like that word God, call it the ultimate complexity. Whatever you call it, the whole universe is moving towards it. And I think that again, making it more ambiguous in the sense that you don't necessarily have to conjure up something to God if maybe you're not a religious person. But
Mhm,
I think that even if you're not a religious person, there's like a difference between being religious and I think having faith.
mhm,
And so sometimes if you have faith in something, whether that's a god or whether that's yourself or a higher power, it's still something that I think you can use as like a framework
yep,
to relate to others, to relate to, the world, yourself. And I think that Lynn is someone that doesn't necessarily have strong footing in like religious beliefs,
Mhm.
which is why I think him and Catterby have such interesting dialogue, because Catterby is coming from one end of the spectrum where Lynn is coming from the other.
Yep.
And it's like, how do you have conversations with people that have such different or opposing views? Like, is there opportunity to find a gray area? Does it
Mhm.
allow you to maybe make more of like an informed decision based on your own beliefs? Does it change anything? So
Mhm.
I think that's what really happens throughout their relationship and the conversations that they have. And I think that's why Lynn sees Catterby as such a strong father figure, because he instills a lot of values in Lynn that he probably wouldn't have had otherwise.
Mhm. And another one of Katterby's main points is good versus evil. And essentially, back to that ultimate complexity, he says that anything good is moving towards that ultimate complexity, and anything evil is moving away from it. And
Mm-hmm.
again, there's never a specific definition of what that actually means, which I also love about this book is yes, Katterby is saying all these things to Lynn, and Lynn is interpreting it in his own way, but the reader can also interpret it in their own way. Because I remember
Mm-hmm.
I had to read their back and forths like 10 times over just to really understand what they were talking about. But I think it is just so open to interpretation because Catterby is also never forcing Lynn to believe one way or another. It's just he's just constantly challenging his current thinking, which
Right.
I love.
you know, Fast forwarding a lot, kind of glazing over the big things. So Lynn gets settled into Bombay. I think that he's a little bit maybe startled by seeing how much poverty is there,
Hmm.
but then also being able to realize that people living in poverty are not necessarily like suffering. So it helps shift his
Yes.
perspective a lot.
Yes.
And I think that is something he comes to know a lot more once he is immersed in the slums, because he, spoiler alert, he ends up living in there for
Yep.
quite a while.
Yep.
Um, so let's kind of open that up a little bit, because I think that's such an integral piece to Lynn's story and his redemption arc. So let's get into that. Lynn gets jumped one night, and his assailants,
Yeah.
yeah, his assailants stole his wallet, his money, everything. And Prabhu had originally put Lynn up in a hotel, and so now Lynn doesn't have any money to pay for said hotel. So Prabhu was like, well, I'll take you to the slums. You can live there. So Lynn starts to live in the slums for a little bit. And then how he kind of transitions into a doctor role is because a fire breaks out in a portion of the slums, and some of like the residents there end up getting severely burned.
Yep.
And Lynn has like a medical kit of some sort. And I'm pretty sure this isn't really talked about much in the book, but I'm pretty sure that Lynn has like a history of being some sort of medic, because he has some kind of like foundational
Yeah.
knowledge
Or like
around like
enough.
enough to like help and do something.
Yeah.
So Lynn starts taking care of these people, helping them. And then the next morning, Prabhu comes into Lynn's tent in the slums, and he's like, okay, your patients are ready for you.
Yeah.
So everyone just started seeing Lynn as like this savior, people, like a doctor, someone who's helping us, someone who knows what they're doing. And that's kind of how he takes on the role of like being a doctor to the people in the slums.
Yes. And he just becomes just so loved in the
Mhm.
slums because here's this white man that is living in the slums. And that's even like the first shocking thing to everyone
Right.
in Bombay and everyone he meets because it's like first of all he can also speak the language a little bit and he learns
Hmm.
a little more as he goes, but just the fact that here's this white man living in the slums with
Hmm.
all these people and he's their doctor. So
Yep.
through that he eventually gains the attention
Hmm.
of Patterby,
Right.
who owns
And
the slums.
yes, and that is a perfect way to get into how does Catterby, knowing that he owns the slums, what does he do to help these people who are clearly living in immense poverty, horrible, horrific conditions? What is he doing about it,
Right.
considering he owns that piece of land or wherever they are kind of getting together?
Yeah.
Um, And that's when what I think is interesting is when Abdullah takes Lynn to like the epicenter of the Bombay black market for medicine to get more supplies, to
Yep.
be like more equipped with things that come up in the slums. And this is again speculation, but I wonder if like that could be something seen as like a form of solicitation where
Mm,
Caterby is a man of privilege in that way, and he has the resources, he has the means, all with the intent to get Lynn into his good graces to say, okay, well, you need these things. I have the power to give them to you. Now, what are you going to do for me? You
right.
know, it's like his way to lure him in to eventually be one of Caterby's guys. Because at this point, Lynn isn't working for Caterby yet in
Right.
the passport like black market stuff.
Right. No, he obviously learns what he's doing in a doctor role, and he's it piques his interest a little bit. And again, we don't really find out a lot of Cotterby's true motives
Mm-hmm.
till the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not going to spoil too much, but
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that while Lynn is getting a little bit more acquainted with Abdullah, Caterby, Prabhu, which has been his like person there from the beginning, is trying to warn Lynn and say, hey, these people are a little dangerous. Like, watch your back. I kind of don't like you being involved with them.
yeah,
Um, and so that kind of causes, you know, just some like little tiffs, I think, between Prabhu and Lynn because Prabhu is really so concerned with Lynn's like best interest because he
yeah.
genuinely loves him so much.
Yep. So Lynn is working at the slums at this point for a while, and eventually there's a bad outbreak of cholera, which is essentially a super deadly, was it like a stomach virus or some sort of
Mm.
virus that
Hmm.
terrorizes the slums and kills so many people. But he's eventually tasked because he's really the main doctor there. So he
Hmm.
has people constantly in and out of this little hut. And obviously that's spreading around Bombay too, that there's this cholera outbreak in the slums and there's this white man doctor who's helping everyone. And we can kind of segue back a little to our girl Carla because this also piques her interest and
Hmm.
she's like, "Oh, well, I know him. I'm
Hmm.
going to go help." Because Carla again, like good versus evil can be applied to her as well because
Hmm.
she's a little sketchy, she's a little shady, but she'll always do the right thing.
Hmm.
And the first kind of real glimpse that we get of that is her showing up at the slums, willing to help Lynn with everything. And I think her doing that too just again deepens Lynn's feelings for her a little bit.
Right. And I think, which we're going to get into this right now, actually, I think that Carla is very infatuated and arguably in love with Lynn, but she really struggles to admit that to
Mm-hmm.
herself because of what her past looked like. So when she went to go help Lynn with the cholera outbreak, I think that's when, you know, they started to really have more moments of like emotional intimacy to be vulnerable and to talk about her past a little bit more because she is, I'd say she's a lot more guarded with a lot of the things that she's gone through.
Oh,
Um,
100%.
so she kind of, you know, cracks open the door a little bit for Lynn to come in. And, you know, we come to find out that um, her parents died when she was pretty young. So she had to live with her uncle and her aunt. And her aunt, you know, she had like a really tough relationship with her. Her aunt actually hated her. So then Carla was really left to fend for herself.
Mm-hmm.
So she, you know, took on some like babysitting gigs, whatnot. And one of the fathers of the children that she would babysit raped her. And there's a quote in the book that I think just like really delivers like the impact of that experience. And it says, you know, he touched her shoulder and she smiled, and it was her last smile for a very long time. Because you're just so like naive. Oh, sorry, sirens, ruining my train of thought. In that moment, you know, like you're still just so young, naive. You don't really or would ever imagine that someone, a father, nonetheless, of the children that you're babysitting, would ever violate you like that.
Yeah.
And then I think Lynn also talks about, after that experience, like Carla lost the part of loving that grows in trust, which
Mm,
is why she's so guarded with people. And I think why she doesn't really want to admit her feelings for Lynn. And it's
yeah.
always this like cat and mouse situation where they're just like chasing each other. And
Right.
I think that adds to their love story because it's like perseverance, commitment. He never gives up on her, and like she doesn't give up on him in a lot of ways too.
Yeah. And I think because he's and I think he, at least throughout this book, he's almost a little too trusting with people
Yes.
because he falls
Yes.
in love with Carla the first second he sees her, and
Yeah.
he trusts her for the entire book until
Hmm.
the end. When even so,
Hmm.
I think he still does. But he's almost too trusting of a lot of people, whereas
Hmm.
she is the total opposite. Because again, she's been in Bombay a lot longer than him. She's been through a lot of different things than him. So
Hmm.
whereas she's approaching still flirty, still, witty, charismatic, fun, she does not trust him fully. She does not fully open herself up. Whereas Lynn is like, I'll lay everything out for you. I
Hmm.
trust you. And kind of makes for a kind of unbalanced dynamic, but also with the things they do have in common, it's like, okay, that just squashes everything.
Exactly. I need to read a quote from the book of Lynn. I want you guys to be able to really understand how he feels about her, how he thinks about her, and how he writes about her.
Yes.
This quote.
Please.
So brace yourself.
Okay.
Okay. I couldn't explain that love to Carla or anyone else, including myself. I never believed in love at first sight until it happened to me. Then, when it did happen, it was as if every atom in my body had been changed, somehow as if I'd become charged with light and heat. I was different forever, just for the sight of her. Oh my God, crying. And the love of that opened in my heart seemed to drag the rest of my life behind it. From that moment onward, I heard her voice in every lovely sound the wind wrapped around me. I saw her face in brilliant mirrored flares of memory every day. Sometimes when I thought of her, the hunger to touch her and to kiss her and to breathe a cinnamon scented minute of her black hair clawed at my chest and crushed the air in my lungs. Holy fuck, I'm dying.
You're like,
Like, I'm dying. Okay. Clouds heavy with their burden of monsoon rain massed above the city, above my head, and it seemed to me in those weeks that all gray heaven was my brooding love. The very mangroves trembled with my desire, and at night, too many nights, it was my restive sleep that rolled and turned the sea in lusted dreaming until the sun each morning rose with love for her. Bye. See you later. Throwing myself off a cliff.
like
Like,
he literally just said that the whole universe and world changes from his love for her. I'm sorry.
I
And
can't.
again, this is not a fantasy novel.
Right.
This is a real, he actually felt those things and wrote them down. Like, I'm sorry. Julian and Scott better fucking figure it out and start writing us the most unbelievable poems ever because if anyone ever said, if anyone ever said any of these things about me,
I know. I know.
oh, but that is just literally one quote.
Just one.
And he just fucking loves her so much and just sees her. Even when she's not being fully transparent, he sees her and he understands her and he's patient with her.
I know. And there was another quote that also stood out to me when she was opening up to him about her past. I think it read, lovers find their way by such insight and confidences. They're the stars we use to navigate the ocean of desire. And the brightest of those stars are the heartbreaks and sorrows. the more precious gift you can bring to your lover. Oh, sorry. The most precious gift you can bring to your lover is your suffering. So I took each sadness she confessed to me and pinned it to the sky. Like, are you joking? Imagine someone disclosing their biggest vulnerability to you, and the fact that you hold it that delicately and gently and see it more as a representation of how much you love them and adore them because of that thing. Like,
This book could literally just be filled of his thoughts about Carla, and I would eat it up just
same.
the same. Like, anytime her name is on the page, you know that you are about to get some of the most beautiful fucking writing that you have ever read in your life. Like, I have never read
No.
words so beautiful in any other book that I've read. Like, he just has such a way of just making her seem like, I don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to know her, and I want to talk to her, and I want to be like,
I
explain
know.
everything to me.
And I want to know if they still are in each other's lives.
I'm sorry. I don't care if they're not. I'm going to tell myself they are because
We
I
have to
know.
believe that they are.
But again, like, all of this said and done, little spoiler, won't give you the full spoiler. Carla ends up betraying Lynn's trust at the end
Yep.
of the book, and she is not who she makes herself out to be. And again, I think that is part of Lynn's journey with trust throughout this book. And
Right.
I mentioned before how he's a little too trusting. And again, I think he was just so blinded by his love for her
Mm-hmm.
that knew no bounds. And no matter what she did, like, he wasn't going to pick up on it. He wasn't
Right.
going to see it. If she was sketchy, he wasn't going to care because she was there.
Right.
And it was kind of like because they definitely weren't around each other the whole book. They would go long periods of time without
Right.
seeing each other.
Yeah.
And still, he still just held so much love in his heart for her. Like, oh, so amazing.
And I think like what made things worse is that I don't want to necessarily say that Carla's intentions of the betrayal were all bad, because I think
Right.
that in the beginning, all how she viewed Lynn come like, the middle towards the end of the book, that was all of like the process of them getting to know each other. Whereas before she even knew him, she just saw him as like a pawn, on her fucking chessboard, because she is unfortunately under kind of this like role and position of power because she does work for Catterby. And it's like a
Oh,
means
I
of
guess spoiler revealed.
sorry guys, it's hard for me to talk
Revealed.
about it. It's hard for me to talk about it without talking about it. But because Catterby gave her safety and survival, and she feels like this is the only way that she can have that is if she kind of abides by the rules. So I think that she didn't really maybe understand like the weight of her betrayal until she kind of put the pieces together and like, oh shit, we actually developed such a good love here. But I didn't really do that to harm him in the beginning. It's just because like this is what it was,
Right. And again, I think eventually Lynn can understand because part of what we didn't mention earlier, she was raped and she actually ended up killing the guy that raped her.
Yes.
She is also on the run. She's also in a
Yeah.
very similar position as Lynn. They're both on the run. They're both fleeing their past. And, as much as he might feel betrayed, I
Mm-hmm.
think it does not last long because
Mm-hmm.
he understands. He has been in similar situations where he's had no other choice but to do certain things that might be considered evil. Yet he understands that what the choice she made, she kind of had to make. And I think that just makes it all the more just amazing and complex, like, not supporting murder or heroin use, but like,
Mm-hmm.
if it creates a love story like this one.
I know. I
But
know.
yeah, it's just, she's the best. She's the best.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. She's the
She
best.
is.
And yeah, so eventually Lynn learns the entire time she was also working for Caterby.
Mhm.
And Lynn was also working for Caterby, and it was never known. Caterby never told him. She never told him. Carla is in the slums with Lynn. She's really seeing everything that he's doing. Again, some time passes, and then there's kind of an alert around the city that people are being murdered, and there's this graffiti being left at all the scenes. So one day comes along, and Lynn and Carla, I believe Abdullah goes with them, or someone else goes with them. I can't really remember. And they go to this site, and I don't know if I can't remember. Again, we read this a little while ago, guys, so sorry. But if the body was still there, but someone had been brutally murdered, and the words Sapna, Sapna, were written in graffiti.
Sapna is essentially a movement that has declared war against the rich people of Bombay. So it's these people going into wealthy people's homes, killing them, trying to galvanize the poor onto their side,
Mm-hmm.
which causes like a huge issue with, I think, Caterby's army, if you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
And so that's something that gets brought, I think, to Lynn's attention when he sees that like graffitied throughout
Yes.
the city.
Yeah. So Sapna now is kind of a big part throughout the book because Lynn, he kind of gets this mission a little bit along with Carla to kind of figure out what's going on, why this is happening. So that kind of continues throughout. And again, as he starts doing that, he kind of gets into more dangerous territory. He's, again, becoming more well known in Bombay. Eventually, we meet again. We kind of talked about her a little bit before, Madame Zhao. And one of Carla's big favors that she asks of Lynn is to help one of her friends kind of escape from Madame Zhao because
Mhm.
she's not a very good boss and she's, again, a major fucking bitch. So Carla's
And the
like,
friend is Lisa, by the way.
yes, her name is Lisa. So Lynn eventually, again, not going to go through every single little detail, helps get her out. Madame Zhao, now she wants some revenge on Lynn,
Mhm.
right?
So I think we also touched a little bit on Ula, which is just another secondary character that's connected to Carla and Lisa.
Yep.
So she ends up, asking Lynn for a favor to help her, meet up with someone out in front of Leopold's, which again is like the central point where all this shit goes down.
Yep.
Um, so again, it's not quite clear if it was a setup, if this was just like a very thing of a coincidence. I don't know. Lynn ends up getting thrown into jail in Calaba. And so I think this was like another big turning point in the story because this was the history of like what made Lynn flee the prison in Australia where he was tortured, he
Yep.
was locked up. And so, yeah, he gets imprisoned there and then he gets transferred to a different prison called Arthur Road Prison.
Mm.
And the conditions in this place are fucking horrible.
Yep.
It's disgusting. There's like different forms of like bacteria in the water. It's just, it was just horrible, horrible, horrible. And this part in the book were just so many beautiful, again, like that monologue that we see throughout this book of just Gregory's thoughts. And it was just like a meditation of connecting his past to like what he's currently going through in the moment.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
and
he fled this situation in
Mhm.
Australia. He never wanted to be in this position ever again. And here he is back in a prison being tortured, shackled once again. Like
Right.
once again. And I actually don't remember, do the guards in this prison, they don't know who he is yet, right? Or do they
Yeah.
find out?
So they do know. Again, here's a spoiler, but again, whatever. I don't fucking care. This is my favorite book, and I'm going deep into it. So yeah, the policemen do know who he is, and that gets revealed a little bit after like all the torture and imprisonment happens. But um, Lynn actually gets himself into a worse situation because he ends up befriending one of these guys in prison. I believe his name was Mahesh, if I remember. And he sees that this guy is getting like a beating and whatnot. So Lynn almost like sacrifices himself and is like, I'm going to put myself in the middle of it because you don't deserve this.
Yeah.
So that almost like worsens the treatment that he gets in prison.
Yep.
To quote, again, one of the most beautifully well said things of Gregory David Roberts, it says, prisons are the temples where devils learn to pray. Pray being Prey. Every time we turn the key, we twist the knife of fate, because every time we cage a man, we close him in with hate. Like, are you joking? Are you joking? There's also, again, a secondary kind of like character that he kind of crossed paths with before. He is ironically in that same prison. So one of Lynn's friends, Vikram, who kind of has an affiliation to Caterby, ends up coming to rescue Lynn. He strikes a deal with the police guards at the
Mhm.
prison, end up bailing Lynn out for like $10,000. And yes, the guards wanted it in US currency.
Yep.
So Lynn is like, okay, that's fine. But like under one condition, these guys are coming out with me. So they
Mhm.
get bailed out. And then this is when it really, where Lynn starts to work for Caterby, because Caterby was the one that essentially got Lynn out of prison. So now I think that almost like increased his sense of like indebtedness,
Right.
if you will,
Because
to Caterby.
they had been in contact before. They would have their like meetings where they would have their philosophical chats, but it wasn't a working relationship.
Relationship.
And
Yep.
Lynn, I don't think, knew until he really started working for him what exactly Cotterby was doing and what he was in charge of. So yes, after once Cotterby helps him get out of prison, then he's like, well, yeah, I mean, I kind of got to work for you at this point because you helped me out so much, and now I view you as such an important person in my life. So kind of
Right.
like an easy decision for him.
And that's where, so this is where it comes to light Lynn's identity. So the police guards, whatever, they know that Lynn is an Australian fugitive. They
Mhm.
have the files there. They show it to Vikram. Vikram is like, is this true? Lynn is kind of caught and he has no choice but to own up to it. So come to find out, the guards knew all along like who he was, which is why they tried to get that bribe of like, okay, if you want this information to stay private, cough up the 10K and
Mhm.
all is well.
Yep.
And so Lynn is feeling really confused about, how is this a thing? If they knew that I'm a fugitive, why are they going to let me go? And Vikram, he says an incredible thing in the book, which I'm going to read, where he says, this is not England or New Zealand or Australia or wherever the fuck else. This is India, man. This is India. This is the land of the heart. This is where the heart is king. The fucking heart. That's why you're free. That's why that cop gave you back your phony passport. That's why you can walk around and not get picked up, even though they know who you are. They could have fucked you, Lynn. They could have taken your money, Catter's money, and let you go and then get some other cops to bust you and send you the fuck home, but they didn't do it and they won't do it because you got them in their heart, man. Their Indian fucking heart. They looked at all what you did here and how the people in that slum love you, and they thought, well, he fucked up in Australia, but he's done some good shit here. If he pays up, we'll let the fucker go. Because they're Indians. That's how we keep this crazy place together, with the heart.
Yes. And that is such a big part of the book too. And like it's really emphasized what a beautiful place India is and how
Mm-hmm.
beautiful the people are. And that is such a good quote to bring up because it's so true. Like he's pretty much like, yeah, like, well, we actually have a heart here. We're not just trying to fuck you over constantly and keep you in prison. Like everyone knows the good that you've been doing. So, yes, obviously it'll take some money because duh, everywhere in the world revolves around money, but still they knew the whole time and he could have been picked up, but no. Like the beautiful people of India, they saw for what he was doing there and they're like, we'll leave him alone.
I know.
Oh,
And I wonder how that must have like resonated in Lynn's mind of, wow, I've been here for however long it's been at that point, and I thought I was always still on the run,
yeah.
and knowing that they knew who I was, but it was still okay,
Yep.
so Fast forward, Lynn gets out of prison, starts working for Caterby. Carla had a business deal in a different part of India that actually ends pretty poorly. So she flees. She basically tells Lynn, if you don't stay here with me, like, I'm not waiting for
In
you.
Goa, in
So,
the other part. So she's
yes.
in Goa, and she's like, "You need to stay with me in Goa, or I'm not going to wait for you."
Yeah. So Lynn had like other commitments that had to make him go back to Bombay. So even though he obviously didn't want to leave his one true love, he had to because he's a man of honor. So he leaves. That kind of, tarnishes his relationship with Carla. And then once he comes back to Bombay, he gets word that something happened to Abdullah. Again, spoiler alert. Come to find out that Abdullah was accused of being affiliated with Sapna, which was that movement that we touched on earlier, and he was killed. So, talk of the town is that, he was shot, they can't find his body. So, it's this whole like enigma that Lynn is trying to piece together. And obviously, Abdullah is Lynn's brother. So,
Yeah.
of course, he's fucking devastated, and I'm sure that there's some like regret in there or like guilt where he was in prison, he couldn't be there to protect his brother, this is my fault.
Yep.
So I think with the state of the relationship with Carla, where she's like, fuck you, I'm not going to wait for you, and then losing his brother Abdullah, Lynn is in like a really low place where he starts to spiral. And like we talked about in the beginning, he does have a history of a heroin addiction. And so it's easy to fall back to those vices when you're in like a really low spot. So Lynn ends up relapsing, unfortunately, and he is in an opium den for 3 months. And so in the novel, how that's kind of like portrayed is he just loses all concept of time
Yep.
until one of Caterby's men, Nazir, comes to rescue him with Carla. And Caterby, is trying to recruit Lynn to get him to come to Afghanistan to serve in the war.
Yes.
But he's like, you need to get sober first. And this was such a beautiful, beautiful representation, in my opinion, of men's mental health
Mm.
and how it's not necessarily talked about enough and nor encouraged for men to express that. So I'm going to read a quote. And so if we need to talk about this quote because it's one of the best.
Okay.
It says, the tears when they come to some men are worse than beatings. They're wounded worse by sobbing. Men like that than they are by boots and batons. Tears begin in the heart, but some of us deny the heart so often and for so long that when it speaks, we hear not one, but 100 sorrows in the heartbreak. We know that crying is a good and natural thing. We know that crying isn't a weakness, but a kind of strength. Still, the weeping rips us root by tangled root from the earth, and we crash like fallen trees when we cry.
And that's really that. Like, that's that. Like, there's nothing. He just said it. He
He
just
just
said
said
it.
it. He just said
And
it.
it was, I don't know. I don't know. And I think he really wasn't able to process all of his emotions, like
Mhm.
that he explains in that quote, until he hit that rock bottom of relapsing and being in that den for so long. And then, yeah, eventually it takes someone like Carla
Mhm.
to pull him out of it.
I think it's so hard to access a lot of those emotions that either are like stigmatized or you have your own sense of shame around, or they're not, again, like not encouraged or supported to express and to talk about.
Right.
And so I always feel, well, I always think that like numbness, it's not like an absence of feeling emotions. It's almost like
Too much.
you feel too much
Mhm.
that you then become numb.
Yep.
And I think that that quote, oh, like it's just the liberation of kind of like letting yourself feel all that and letting it come out. And so I think that Carla being there for Lynn was like a huge pivotal like turning point for him getting back on his feet,
Yeah.
getting sober,
Yes.
and being able to go and help Caterby.
Yes. Which he does, which he does. And yes, eventually he pulls himself out of it. I think, again, it needed to happen for him. And
Mhm.
then after that, he was ready to go. And Khaderbai is like, well, we're going to Afghanistan. We're going to war.
So while they're, stationed in the camp, like in Afghanistan, preparing for like the warlords there, Caterby and Lynn were in the middle of one of their many insightful philosophical conversations, and Caterby had recited a few lines of a poem that way earlier on in the novel he found on Carla's desk, and he ended up pocketing that piece of paper. And he took that piece of paper with him throughout the whole novel. So it's something that really, one, meant a lot to him. And whether it was he resonated with the words or it was the connection to Carla,
Mm.
irregardless, something that he had with him throughout the whole novel and helped get him through a lot of tough times.
Yep.
And so when Caterby said that, Lynn kind of, prompted him and was like, wait, like, what did you just say?
How do you know that?
How do you know that?
Right.
And he's like, oh, it was one of Carla's like favorite poems. And it starts the conversation of like, wait, Carla, how well do you know Carla? And Caterby shares, well, she works for me. And, and Caterby tells Lynn, we've had so many conversations about you. This was something that she never shared, that she works for me. So it's kind of like killing two birds with one stone. Lynn is betrayed by Carla. He finds out the betrayal of Carla at the same time he's finding out the betrayal of Caterby.
Yep.
And it kind of just starts this whole, I guess, like revelation where Lynn is like, was all of this a lie? Like, what was the point of me getting involved in all of this? Are any of these relationships real?
Yep. Because it
Um,
turns out that Carla first approached Lynn because she wanted him, because Khaderbai wanted her to get him involved in their business. So
right.
well, now he's like, was any, like you just said, was anything real? Was anything that I felt real? Was anything me and Khaderbai talked about real? Or was it all just part of their plan to lure me into their business, which I fell for pretty easily?
Yeah.
So now they're on a fucking mountain in Afghanistan getting ready for war. And this man that he's supposed to trust with his entire life, he's like, I don't even know you anymore. And his one true love, he's like, I don't even know her anymore. So he's just now in this position where he doesn't know what to believe. He doesn't know how to feel. And it's just a whole clusterfuck of emotions for him. Plus, he's in the middle of a war.
Right. With like essentially no escape.
Yeah.
Do I sit here and accept my fate of potential death without fighting alongside of this guy who I thought I really knew and betrayed me?
Yep.
Or do I still potentially face that reality while I fight alongside of him?
Yep.
So that's kind of like where Lynn goes back and forth with. And I think other things that then came to light of all the medication that Caterby supplied to Lynn earlier on in the novel was essentially used as like an experiment. It wasn't with the intent to help and do the right thing. It was more so to test to see if it was effective and safe enough to bring with them to the war. Because essentially, Caterby knew this was coming. This was the purpose of the whole mission of recruiting Lynn, getting him close. And I don't want to necessarily, I think that Caterby really does love Lynn, and
Yeah.
I think he really did see him as like a son.
Yes.
But again, like when men are in these positions of power, it really clouds their sense of judgment and they become very self-centrically motivated.
Mm,
So I think that even though he did love Lynn, power kind of outweighed that.
yeah.
So and the other thing too, Caterby knew Lynn was in prison at Arthur Road prison, I think. And he could have gotten him out sooner, but didn't because of a partnership or like a deal that he struck with Madame Zhao. So just like so many entanglements of betrayal that I think really twisted the dagger a little bit more.
Right. And I actually don't think we ever straight up said that it was Madame Zhao that got him arrested. I think we skipped over that, as we've skipped
Spoiler alert!
a lot of things. And guess what? Like it's hard to keep track of everything, people. We're trying.
Guys, and I'm sorry, it's literally like almost 1,000-page novel. Like, give us a fucking break in.
Seriously, like we are doing our best. And again, well, this is our first time doing this, so we're hoping we're making sense. But but yeah, so now Lynn is just like, holy shit. And then unfortunately, Cotterby fucking dies.
So Lynn ends up not going with Catterby to meet these warlords, and he ends up staying back at camp with what's his name, whatever his name is. So Lynn stays back at camp, and that's when Catterby gets killed, and they bring him back, his body obviously, and Lynn is like, "Holy shit!" And the last words that Lynn ever spoke to Catterby was basically him saying this, "Hey, know this, I fucking hate you. Like, you were once a father figure to me. You're nothing." And now he died.
Yeah.
There was no, like, again, that was all well warranted to say. And obviously he meant it. But it was probably like very emotionally driven given the circumstances of just finding that out.
Right.
And he has to also cope with the fact the last words he said to this person he once loved and cherished was, "I hate you."
Right. Right. Because he never again, never expected him to die. So not only was all of this revealed to him, he now has to work through Cotterby's death,
Mm-hmm.
which seemed impossible. Like even throughout the book, like Cotterby is this untouchable,
Mm-hmm.
unkillable almost character who is just like he's almost like a god in himself with like his reputation and also just how Lynn views him. So for him to die, it was just like the rug just brutally pulled out from underneath Lynn. And he's just kind of like, well, what the fuck do I do
Mm-hmm.
now? So now he's coming back from this war and Cotterby is gone.
Mm-hmm.
So, Gal, please, I hope you remember more than me. He kind of comes back and does he confront Carla? He confronts Carla, right? About what he found out from Cotterby about her working with him. And she's just kind of like, well, I had to do what I had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And she really wasn't sorry for it. And again, I just fucking respect the hell out of her. Like, I don't know. She's
I know.
such an icon. Like, I feel bad for Lynn in that moment, but she's just kind of like, I had to do what I had to do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I had to keep myself safe. Cotterby protected me. She also saw him as a father figure. So, yes, I'm sure she felt a little bit of remorse, but she didn't really
Yeah.
share that with Lynn.
I don't know. I can't remember. There was somewhere in the book where Lynn was saying he'll never be able to hate either of them, like Carla or Catterby. So even though Lynn acknowledges that what they did was fucked up, how much he loves them is essentially like more important than what they did. Because I think Lynn is also a very pragmatic and rational dude where he can probably understand like why they did what they did, which
Yeah.
makes it a little bit easier for him to reconcile that. And
Mhm.
so I think that he doesn't necessarily hold it against them because I think that the relationships he formed with Carla and Catterby, for example, meant so much more in the grand scheme of things versus this like little nugget of betrayal and like dishonesty, which again, not excusing that by any means, but sometimes like that happens in relationships where you think that you are doing the right thing by this person,
Yeah.
but it ends up like hurting them instead.
Right.
So it's a very real thing. But yeah, and I think when Lynn comes back to Bombay, he kind of comes back as obviously a changed man for witnessing stuff in the war, having your men die next to you, having your father figure die, leaving that relationship with those words spoken of, "I hate you."
Yeah.
And he comes back in a little bit with like a vendetta against a lot of people or like a vengeance, if you will. So he really wants to get revenge on Madame Zhao, given the fact that she was behind a lot of these things and she's a fucking bitch. Um, and he goes to plan to attack the brothel, but come to find out it's already been burned down. So kind of is done for him.
Yep.
Um, but they have to like battle a few of her like bodyguards in the process, which Didier of all people goes with him to do that.
Yes.
I love that though.
Yeah. And again, like yes, we have spoiled some stuff, but there is so much else
Hmm.
that we have not even touched on because it's impossible to do. But it just, again, the common themes of everything are just love. No matter what people do, no matter if how much they could hurt you, if that love is strong enough, it's not going anywhere.
Hmm.
Redemption, his redemption arc, just coming in as such a broken convict on the run, and he ends off this book with more of a sense of purpose and really has found his home in Bombay, and the people of
Hmm.
Bombay love him, like love him so much.
Carla is engaged to this guy Ranjit, and Lisa and Lynn's relationship starts to kind of get a little bit closer because Lisa has always been very fond of Lynn. Um, and as Lynn is kind of walking out of some event that he was attending with Lisa, he recognizes Abdullah. Not a ghost of Abdullah, the real
Spoiler
deal
alert,
Abdullah.
Abdullah's back, baby.
Abdullah's back. He was never fucking gone,
No,
people.
we tricked ya.
We tricked. Yeah. But yeah, he essentially tells Lynn that he was waging a secret fight against men with the new connections to the government in Iran. So a lot of, Abdullah's just filling Lynn in essentially about why he was gone, what happened, and what's to come, which will be connected to Mountain Shadow, which, oh, so excited to talk about that too. But
Yes.
all you need to know is Lynn and Abdullah are back. And even though Lynn experienced so much loss with Carla being engaged to somebody else, Caterby dying, he still has his brother.
Yep.
So, and I think in one of Lynn's last reflections as the novel comes to an end,
Mhm.
I love how he's thinking about how all of these things that transpired throughout the book have led him to this moment of what he's going to embark on in Mountain Shadow. But a quote that is so beautiful. It reads, "The cloak of the past is cut from patches of feeling and sewn with rebus threads. Most of the time, the best we can do is wrap it around ourselves for comfort or drag it behind us as we struggle to go on. But everything has its cause and its meaning. Every life, every love, every action and feeling and thought has its reason and significance,
Yep.
its beginning and the part it plays in the end. Sometimes we do see, sometimes we see the past so clearly and read the legend of its parts with such acuity that every stitch of time reveals its purpose and a kind of message is enfolded in it. Nothing in any life, no matter how well or poorly lived, is wiser than failure or clearer than sorrow. And in the tiny, precious wisdom that they give to us, even those dread and hated enemies, suffering and failure have their reason and their right to be."
And that
Mic drop, book drop.
literally all of our all guys, all of our like rambling aside, like that is the quote. Like that is what this book is about. It is about you can fail, you can do so many things wrong, but all of those failures, all of those missteps, every trauma, every negative thing, every positive thing, everything matters
Mhm.
and is important and can be changed. Like you can redeem yourself no matter what. Because
Yeah.
no matter what, it's all about your own story and it leads you to the person you're meant to be.
Yep.
And that
One scene.
that's the point of the book. Like
Yeah.
ignore everything we said up to this point. The point of the book is just like going through things, being
Mm.
able to look yourself in the face and acknowledge them,
Mhm.
accept them, change them, become better.
Yeah.
And it's just so beautifully shown in this book because it's such a rare life story for someone and it's just proven by him, someone who was a heroin addict, literally escaped prison over a wall, fled to Bombay, become part of the Bombay mafia. Like if he can reform, anyone can reflect.
Yeah.
Like anyone. And that's
Seriously though.
about just like, oh, just the steps that you need to take and can take to become the best version of yourself. And
Yeah.
the most important thing is to look inward and reflect.
Hmm.
That is like the most important thing I think for everyone to learn,
Hmm.
is to be able to look inward, figure out your flaws, and work to change them.
Hmm.
And it takes time. Like I can't remember exactly how long this book takes place, but it's a long fucking time. And it should just inspire everyone.
Seriously though.
It will all be figured out. It will all come to focus, and life, once you learn all of that about yourself, like life just gets that much easier and it makes
Hmm.
more sense, and it's just, oh,
Hmm.
it's so good. And this is how, last quote for you, this is how he ends the book. Okay. And again, when we're saying God, even in this book, it's anyone's interpretation of what they believe that God is. So this is the last paragraph, last page. For this is what we do: put one foot forward and then the other, lift our eyes to the snarl and smile of the world once more, think, act, feel, add our little consequence to the tides of good and evil that flood and drain the world, drag our shadowed crosses into the hope of another night, push our brave hearts into the promise of a new day, with love, the passionate search for a truth other than our own, with longing, the pure, ineffable yearning to be saved. For so long as fate keeps waiting, we live on. God help us, God forgive us, we live on.
And I love how he used the word God in that, because that was such a central theme of like, what is God? Is there a God? And is that confirmation that his beliefs changed? I don't know. Just means, I'm speaking for you and I, because I
Yeah.
know you feel the same,
Yes.
means everything to me. Like,
Yes.
I think about this book all the time. I will never shut up about it. I will never not recommend it to people. I think everyone should read it. I
Yes.
think it is, I've read a lot of good books, but I've never ever read anything like this. And I don't think I ever will, because it's just one of a kind.
Yeah.
And I think it being like based on his real life, just, I don't know, it enhances everything, because it's not just a story that he's pulling out of nowhere.
Right.
It's something that he directly experienced.
Right.
Whether some things were like embellished and fabricated a little bit, this was his life.
Yep.
And I don't know, it's deeply moving. It had a profound impact on me, and I want to read it all the time.
Yep. It just has every element.
Everything.
If we haven't convinced you so far, I mean, nothing will, but
Yeah.
it just has every element of a perfect story. It
Hmm.
has the adventure, it has the love, it
Hmm.
has the redemption, it has the feelings. And
Hmm.
like, again, he describes a fucking tree like it's the most unbelievable tree in existence in the universe, and it's just, you crave reading something so beautiful. And it's the way he describes things, you look at things differently. Like,
Hmm.
it's just amazing. And I know that we spoiled some things, but again, I promise you it will not take away from you reading it for yourself if you guys decide to. Again, strongly encourage if you haven't, because it's a different, listening to us ramble about it and actually reading it are probably the most opposite things ever. So just
But also, like,
read it.
I also don't feel bad about spoiling anything, because at this point,
Ah,
I have been shoving this book in all of your faces for years. And if you
yeah,
haven't read it at this point and you're watching this, I mean, that's on you. So,
true,
like,
true,
you kind of spoiled it for yourself by not reading it first. But
true.
yeah, I will always recommend this. I will continue to recommend it. And everyone should read it, because it's amazing.
It's amazing.
Amazing.
It's amazing. And I think anyone, no matter what, obviously, like we've never been addicted to heroin or been to prison, but you find things in it
Hmm.
that relate to any part of anyone's life. And I think that's important too. Like, you feel, yes, outside of the story, but you will always find things that you can relate to, because again, it's just all about those themes that impact everyone and that everyone goes through. And it's just seeing it written down and explained in the way that he does just not only like validates everything you've ever felt, but it's just so fucking amazing to read. Like
I
it's
know.
just so this would be a 5 out of 5. 5 out of 5 stars, gal. Would you say?
100%. I honestly, it deserves even more than that. Like truly,
Yeah.
everything was perfect.
Yep.
Zero is literally zero complaints
Zero
like
notes. Zero
about
notes.
the book because it just was so well made, well done. Everything was amazing.
Yeah. So next episode will be again the sequel, Mountain Shadow, where Lynn's story continues and
Mm-hmm.
shit goes down. Let me tell you,
Yep.
shit goes down. And
Shit goes down.
but yeah, we're excited about that one. Again, if you want to read it before we film, you'll definitely have time. So again, sequel, Mountain Shadow, Gregory David Roberts. This was Shantaram. And thank you guys for listening. Again, if you stayed this long, holy shit, thank you so much. Thank you so
You're a
much.
real one.
Because this was a rambler, but it's hard to it's just hard to talk about a book like this when just so much is important to know, but you obviously don't want to go
100%.
through the whole thing. So we did our fucking best. We hope that you took some stuff away. We hope it inspires you to read it.
Mm-hmm.
Just thanks. Thanks for being an amazing audience.
And anyone who does read it, our messages are always open.
Please.
Roll through them. Let's chat about it because that's what we love to do. I love talking about things that we both have read and just like what was our impression on it, what
Yep.
impact did it leave on us. So never hesitate to reach out to us if you guys end up reading this book because it's freaking amazing.
Yes, please do. Please do. But thank you all so much again. I think that concludes it. And if you need us, where will we be, girl?
We'll be booked and busy.
Booked and busy, baby. Booked and busy. Booked and busy. Booked and
Booked and
busy.
busy. Busy and booked.
Yeah, the jingle. We're still
Yeah, we're still
still
tweaking
am at
that
the
a little
jingle,
bit.
but thanks, guys. I'm not gonna keep
Yeah.
that in. We're gonna do that again. Thanks, guys.